went at your bidding and passed along their thoroughfares of trade. I ascended their mountains and went down their valleys. I visited their manufacturers, their commercial markets, and emporiums of trade. I entered their judicial courts and legislative halls, but I sought everywhere in vain for the secret of their success. That is, until I entered the church. It was there, as I listened to the soul-equalizing and soul-elevating principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ, as they fell from Sabbath to Sabbath upon the masses of the people, that I learned why America was great and free and why France was a slave. Alexis de Tocqueville, French historian, reporting to the French Senate in 1800. A few years before Dr. D. James Kennedy passed away, I spent an afternoon with him at his church in Florida. Dr. Kennedy was the founder of the world-renowned Coral Ridge Ministries, known for stating on national television regarding abortion, that is, while pointing his finger at his viewers, 4,000 die daily and 300,000 pulpits are silent. On one occasion, Dr. Kennedy told me that while he was holding a large convention at his church, the homosexual lobby was protesting him. A pastor attending the convention was shocked and asked, "Why is your church being protested?" James Kennedy corrected this pastor with a relevant question to his question. "You mean your church doesn't get protested?" Friends, Protestant has meaning. Protestant. America is looking for the Christ that the 78% of Americans claim that they serve. Agree or disagree with Reverend Charles Finney? Well, he stated, "Brethren, our preaching will bear its legitimate fruits. If immorality prevails in the land, the fault is ours in a great degree. If there is decay of conscience, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the public press lacks moral discrimination, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the church is degenerate and worldly, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the world loses its interest in religion, the pulpit is responsible for it. If Satan rules in our halls of legislation, the pulpit is responsible for it. If our politics become so corrupt that the very foundations of our government are ready to fall away, friends, the pulpit is responsible for it." How deprived is the understanding of the modern church when it comes to its own history? Nowadays, effeminate hirelings have infiltrated the pulpits. Pulpits they have no business occupying. And by the looks of them, I can see why the enemies of America are so encouraged. Instead of preaching against sin, transgression of God's moral law, 1 John 3:4, these hirelings accept sin, attempting to cover it with a false grace, read Isaiah 30, and in so doing, they teach their congregants to war against a just and a holy God, Micah 3:5. What a contrast to the preachers who thundered from America's pulpits before, during and after the Revolutionary War, causing the colonialists to stand up to the face of tyranny. The British labeled them as the much-feared Black Robe Regiment. The British were not the only ones who recognized them as the bulwarks of America's independence. Mighty men they were, of iron nerve and strong hand, and unbalanced cheek and heart of flame. God needed not reeds shaken by the wind, not men clothed in soft raiment, Matthew 11:7-8, but heroes of hardihood and lofty courage. And such were the sons of the mighty who responded to the divine call. Bishop Charles Galloway, 1898. The ministers of the Revolution were like their Puritan predecessors, bold and fearless in the cause of their country. No class of men contributed more to carry forward the revolution and to achieve our independence than did the ministers. By their prayers, patriotic sermons, and services, they rendered the highest assistance to the civil government, the army, and the country. Historian B.F. Morris, 1864. The Constitutional Convention and the written Constitution were the children of the pulpit. Historian Alice Baldwin, 1918. Today, the professed church is attempting to flee from its responsibility to be part of the political process when, in fact, God is the one who gave government, read Exodus 18:21. The church is to overcome evil with good, and as our forefathers rightly stated, resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. And friends, might I remind you that God is always willing to give the church what it's willing to fight for.
Welcome to End Time Talk Radio, where the truth is usually stranger than fiction. The purpose of these shows are not to scare you, but to prepare you, because what you don't know could hurt you. The word says in Hosea 4:6, "My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge." Thank you for joining us. My name is Julie, and here is the host of the show, Barry Meyer.
Hey, welcome to End Time Talk Radio. We have a great show. We have a lady named Bev Harris. Now, if you've never heard of her, she has blackboxvoting.org. Now, it's Americans Election Watchdog Group. Bev, welcome to End Time Talk Radio.
Well, it's very nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. You know, we just had an election here last week. It was a special election. We went in, and it was a $25 million ballot issue on for the community college. And, you know, here I'm looking at the stuff you're putting on YouTube with the poll tapes and stuff. And, you know, there's so many things that can happen that we go in and vote. We don't realize what's all happening behind the scenes.
Right. We don't anymore. It's become a complex system that's pretty opaque to most Americans, and we have to get past that and start understanding how the system works, because it really is our duty to oversee our government and oversee the choosing process for our government, and so we have to learn how it works. That's why we have the videos up there, to show people a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I recommend people definitely check that out. Bev, how do people get involved? Because a lot of times people don't think their vote counts.
Well, and in some locations it might not count as much as others, but, you know, people can, what I always say is just do one thing. You know, there's a lot of different things. If you go to blackboxvoting.org, we have a toolkit there, there's videos, there's lots of different things you can choose to do. But you don't have to do everything, and you don't have to solve every problem in the world. Just do one thing, and then the next step is clear.
You know, what is the main concern that you're hearing from people right now?
The main concern is that elections around them are often not transparent. So even if they would want to be able to authenticate what the election results are, make sure they're true, sometimes, well, quite often they're not allowed to. Even very simple things, like in a lot of locations that have paper ballots, citizens are being prevented from ever looking at the paper ballots through Freedom of Information or public records requests, which is seems very odd.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I mean, if there's nothing to hide, why not let them see it? Even after the election, even a year after the election, they store these ballots in many locations and say, but nobody can see them ever.
Well, that's kind of scary. If that's the case, why do they not want us to see it? What is there behind there that they're trying to do to manipulate, maybe change the voting?
Well, you know, it's a good analogy would be, let's say you own a business and your bookkeeper says you can't see the checkbook and you can't see the books. Mm-hmm. I mean, what are you going to think? You know, the transparency is the antidote to corruption. It is the most powerful anti-corruption tool there is. And so if you remove transparency, you are simply creating a corruption-friendly environment. And whether or not it is corrupt really isn't material. The minute you remove transparency, the citizens lose control of the government, and it really is a problem. So one of the first things we advocate is working to restore that transparency, and it differs from location to location because, of course, election laws are different in every state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, one of the things that really concerned me when Barack Obama was won this election the second time, when we're sitting there watching TV, we seen Ohio turn blue, it's all of a sudden the whole United States says, oh, he won. And it was like, wait a second here. You guys didn't even account for anything. It just seemed like, well, it's won. And
they hadn't. They were announcing results before a single vote was counted in many cases. And they were announcing the results based on what they called scientific projections. Well, these are statistical guesses. And I really consider that to be journalistic malpractice because they weren't saying we project that he's the winner, we predict he's going to be the winner, and we'll find out in a couple of days or a couple of weeks when the votes are counted. They're saying, he won, it's over. And that's absolutely, it leaves me speechless every time they do that because, For example, in the state of Oklahoma, they declared the winner before they counted a single vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it ends up, the people get confused. They get really worked up because they're like, wait a second, my vote didn't count.
Well, the thing is, and the votes may have counted, but what they're doing in the United States right now is a confidence game.
Mm-hmm.
And quite literally, they're saying everybody should be confident. Be confident in the elections. We need to get it over quickly so you'll be confident. Well, elections is not about confidence. It's about verification. As Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. So what they're trying to do now is take out the verify and just say trust. And I know that people sense that there's something wrong with that. We have a sense of it, but a lot of times people have a hard time really putting their finger on what's wrong. And as soon as you mention, well, the issue is, can you see and authenticate the election? Can you authenticate that the results are true? And to do that, you have to be able to see and authenticate just 4 things. Who can vote,
mm-hmm.
who did vote, the counting of the vote, and the chain of custody. Of course, who can vote is the voter list,
mm-hmm.
who did vote is the poll list, and the counting of the vote, and the chain of custody. If any one of those things is taken out of public view, then you really don't know if the results are true or false.
Oh, interesting. Bev, maybe can you give a little bit behind the scenes of who your organization is?
Sure. I've been a writer for about 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2002, I started looking at the issue of electronic voting from an accounting standpoint because I had written quite a bit about embezzlement and financial fraud. And I always look at counting of the votes as an accounting problem. It's just a matter of being accountable and being able to show that your numbers all add up. And I realized right away, after I started looking at it, that they had removed some of it from public view. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, well, we really do have a problem then,
uh-huh.
because you cannot say it no longer needs to be accountable to the public. You need to trust in us that we're going to tell you the truth. The minute you do that, there are a certain percentage of people, not everybody, but there is a percentage of people who will cheat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true in, of course, financial accounting. It's true in money, and it's true in elections.
Well, and we know an IRS auditor that worked for the federal government, and he said you wouldn't believe the stuff that the federal government, they want the numbers the way they want, not for the people.
Right. There's a lot of, I don't know, I guess I feel like people are also being told, don't think for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a really bad trend. Watch TV, pick your particular political favorite TV station. They will tell you what issues are important, and they will tell you what the position you should take on the issues. And I've actually had people criticize me because I pay attention to both political sides, and I make up my own mind on each issue based on, coming to my own logical conclusions. And I think we're seeing the same kinds of things with accountability in government, where we're told, don't worry, pretty little head about it, just trust us, it's okay, go about your business. That is not going to work for
mm-hmm.
very long in a democratic system, which is based on the public being aware.
Now, I've noticed that, even with people I know, they will watch Fox News, whatever, and I was like, well, hey, they told me. So, yeah, I do totally agree with that. You talk about black box. What does that mean?
Yeah, the term black box means you can't see inside. It means it's opaque, it's not transparent.
Oh, okay.
And it comes from a couple of places. Computer security experts, when they refer to a computer system as a black box system, it means they're never allowed to look at the software, and they can only guess what it does based on its input and output. With military programs, a black box program is one that the public is not allowed to see either the workings of the program or the budget.
Wow.
So it just simply means opaque, non-transparent elections.
Okay. Well, okay, so I went to the election on Tuesday. Of course, I was on the roster, and I got to see my name on and the address, and they give me a little card, and I flip it in there, go ahead and check the question, and then give the card back to them. So in that process, what all happens?
Well, now I would need to look up what voting system you have. Did you put when you refer to it as a card? Was that the ballot you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. So did you yourself put that into a voting machine, or did you hand it back to the poll worker?
Well, I did put it into the machine, but then I gave it back to him.
Did it come out of the machine then afterwards, so that you still had it? Usually when it goes in a machine, it goes into a base of the machine and stays in there in a ballot box.
Well, it's about the size of a credit card, and when I went to the people to get my...
I see.
Yeah.
So did you have a touch screen then?
I did.
Okay. So I was thinking you had a paper ballot system, but you had a touchscreen system.
Yes.
That card, what that does is tell the machine that you are an authenticated voter, and that theoretically you can't put the card in over and over. Once that card has gone in there, then it has to go and get zeroed out again, and the next voter comes in and uses it.
Oh.
And it theoretically does not identify who you are to the machine that's accepting your votes. However, that doesn't appear to be true. In the state of Indiana, which uses the same system, touchscreen system that Wyoming uses, actually all the touchscreens, when you slide that card in, identify who you are and connect that identity to the vote. An election official actually found that out to her chagrin. She had some sort of a problem, and the election voting machine technician said, "Oh, don't worry, we can pull that vote out." Now, think about that. How are they going to pull your vote out of the touchscreen if they can't associate it with you? So that means that the political privacy is a bit of an issue. But, okay, you put the card into the voting machine. Mm-hmm. It authenticates you. You then select your choices on the touchscreen, and the machine interprets according to its program. It may interpret them correctly, it may interpret them the opposite way, and you can't see that. That's why it's black box or opaque. But it interprets it, and then it stores that data, and at the end of the evening it spits that data back out as a aggregated report. Okay. The problem being, of course, you have no way of seeing whether it recorded your vote correctly. Mm-hmm. If it's aggregating all the votes correctly, you really can't observe electronic bits and bytes. So whatever a programmer told that machine to do, it will do.
Huh. Well, and it's interesting because, it was like, I don't remember the statistics of the score at the end. It was like maybe like 60-40, I think it was, 64 and 44 against. So how does anybody, so really, you really don't know if it could have been the other way.
Exactly. With a touchscreen, absolutely not. Theoretically, if there is a paper ballot, you could, and there are places that do a parallel count where the ballots go through the voting machine and are tabulated, but they can then immediately also have human eyes look at those ballots and compare it with the tabulation and make sure that it's correct. But if you have a touchscreen, you can't recount it. You can't really tell much of anything. It's just a trust-based system.
Huh, that's really scary. One of the things I was thinking today when I was at work, I wanted to ask you is, how did voting happen, or how did they work voting back in the 17 and 1800s? How did that go about compared to today's way of doing things?
Well, actually, there were some real problems with it in the 1700s and early 1800s in that they didn't have a private ballot, a secret ballot, and they had a huge amount of vote selling and paying people to vote certain ways, and then the people could just show them how they voted. Oh. They had a lot of bribery and a lot of coercion and threats going on, people getting beat up for voting the wrong way. So about 1850 in Australia, this is a worldwide problem, and in Australia they came up with the secret ballot system, and that kind of spread over the next 30 years to the rest of the world. The U.S. picked it up in about 1880, and at that point what we were doing was we would go to the polls, check in, they would check that our name was on the voter registration list, we would then fill out a paper ballot, put it in a box. That ballot box never goes anywhere. It stays in public view. And then when the polls close, they immediately take the ballots out and count them in public view so everyone can see. It was a completely transparent system, and it also protected the secrecy of the ballot, and it also costs even now about 1/8 as much to administer as the current electronic voting systems.
Huh. So there really isn't nowadays the checks and balances they had back then.
Right. They started to eliminate the checks and balances somewhat in the 1970s with punch cards, and then in the late 1990s and early 2000s, it was just everybody out of the pool. We're going to throw away the accountability and just do it our way. And they not only have systems that are not accountable to the public, they're not even accountable to the election officials. Most election officials actually have no idea whether the count is true or false. They are depending on the technicians and the programmers.
Well, that's interesting. So, like, let's say a county commissioner and that, do they have any say over this stuff that's happening?
It's different from state to state.
Okay.
The county commissioners generally do pick. In some states, the state actually picks the voting machine, but in Wyoming, the county picks which make and model. But because of a law that was passed in 2002 called the Help America Vote Act, I call it the Help Yourself to America's Vote Act, it sort of mandated that everybody buy voting machines. And they started prosecuting locations that refused to buy the voting machines and wanted to still count by hand. Nevertheless, there are about 1,000 locations in the United States that do still count by hand, usually municipalities, most of them in New England and Wisconsin. But in the rest of the country, they pretty much just said you have to take these voting machines. They only authorized about 3 vendors to sell them. So, and actually 2 of those kind of merged into one. So we really only have kind of a monopoly on delivering the systems, and even a vertical monopoly, which means a system where and quite often the same company is doing voter registration databases, voter check-in electronics, so using electronic poll books in a lot of places, the actual counting of the vote and the reporting of the vote. So the election official is just basically cut out of the loop. They're told, this is good, you should like it, pay lots of money, and our technician will cost you $3,000 a day. Thank you very much.
You know, one thing that was really interesting when you have with the black boxes here, one of the things that they just passed here on the county commissioners, we had one that voted against it 4-4, was about, but in 2015, black boxes, I know this is a little bit different, and in vehicles, you know, like the one county commissioner said, you know, we should bring this to the people. It shouldn't be just the county commissioners voting this for the people. The people should vote if they should have a black box that watches their driving habits.
Interesting. Very interesting. A similar thing happened in New Hampshire where a citizen got an initiative on the ballot to vote whether they wanted to vote on voting machines. Unfortunately, one company programmed all the voting machines, and that company programmed the voting machine that counted the vote as to whether they should continue to count the vote. So it was a huge conflict of interest. And the citizens tried to say, well, on this particular election, it's conflict of interest to have this company control the voting and program it for, you know, whether we're going to retain them. And they didn't succeed, and the company counted its own votes. Basically, what you're looking at is someone deciding, in that case, the company deciding whether they're going to choose themselves. And in elections, to some extent, the government, when the government forces a voting system in, the government being able to choose itself. That's quite literally what we're looking at. Whether the government does choose itself or not in any given election, we can't say, but it certainly is in a position to do so now.
Yeah, you know, there was a gentleman that said, you know, I'm not afraid to die, but I'm really afraid that when I do, I'll start voting for a different party than I ever wanted to. That being said, how many people...
Rising from the grave, eh?
It's true. But, you know, but so true. That happens so often. We do hear about people that are dead that are actually voting.
Well, and you know how that happens. I actually got a hold of some voter lists in Memphis, and I started looking at that. And what happens is, it's insiders usually that are doing this. It's either poll workers or someone inside the election office. And what they do is they go through the voter list and find who has not voted, and they start putting votes into the system in those people's names. Well, of course, some of the people who don't vote, who didn't vote, they didn't vote because they're dead, because they haven't cleaned those names off the list. And so, lo and behold, when people look into it, they say, oh, these dead people voted. Well, that's because the county official or the poll worker didn't know who was dead and who was alive. They were just choosing any name who hadn't voted. And in Memphis, they actually were able to prove that a poll worker had done that, and they actually invalidated the election and had to run a new one. So my theory actually did end up holding water. It was just people who were going through the list. They had inside access either to the machines or the absentee ballots, and they were just putting votes into the system using those names.
Oh, that's really scary. I guess one of the things that leads on to that question is, can these machines be hacked?
Well, yeah, and hacked is, although I've used that term myself, it's not quite the thing we want to look at. It's the administrator typically who would do it.
Okay.
But they can absolutely, easily be adjusted, and it doesn't really even take computer programmers, so that they can be adjusted to record completely bogus votes. I got a hold of the actual voting software for the Diebold system, which is now run by ES&S, but I got a hold of the software, and it's actually built for that. It's got a manual override screen that's available through a secret menu. It's really quite shocking when you look at this. You can right-click on this kind of invisible on the screen, and up pops a menu that says manual entry, and it gives you the numbers that were in the voting machines, and all you do is type new numbers in, and then all the reports come in with your new numbers. It's actually just, and they say, well, we have to do that in case the machines make a mistake so that there's a way to override it. But, okay, but my goodness. So anybody who has access to the machine actually can just completely edit that election result before it comes out. There's actually many more ways. We have a movie that we had a couple of producers follow us around for a couple of years, and HBO picked up the documentary they made for a movie called Hacking Democracy. It actually was nominated for an Emmy. And in that, we demonstrated several different ways where the results were changed. In one case, right in front of the election official. And although he knew, that something was going to happen, he said, I couldn't see anything. I would have certified this election had I not known. There was absolutely nothing to tell me that these results were false. My gosh, here I went and voted, and I'm finding all this stuff out. I'm like going, I want to go back and ask them and say, okay, what part of my vote, did it count or did it not? Did you guys change the vote? I mean, and now I know it's too late now, but what can people maybe do at that polling station at the time? Can they say something? Can they talk to somebody? No, it's too late. By the time elections roll around, and I actually get this question even from some of the national political parties, and they come up to me like 2 days before a federal presidential election and say, what do we do? It's like, well, maybe you should have got on the stick 2 years ago, But they just, you really have to address it through policy changes, which can't be done on the day of the election, and rightfully so. You don't want people suddenly able to make policy changes and change how elections are run on that day. So yeah, you're out of luck on an election day, unfortunately.
One of the things I noticed that you were talking about was biometrics. How is that going to play into voting in the future?
Well, not immediately in the United States. But in most other countries, it's coming on like crazy. And what that is they're starting to say that if you want to vote, not just that you have to present ID, but you have to submit yourself to a Homeland Security style full-scale biometrics profile, meaning 5 fingerprints and a facial scan. And by the way, it's not the same as a photo of your face. It's a facial scan that produces mathematical numbers that allow cameras to then recognize your face from a distance, quite a distance, in fact. So they're starting to say in pretty much every continent, in country after country, in order to vote, you have to submit to biometrics. And the biometrics are then shared with the national defense agencies. It's actually a multinational sharing agreement, which it certainly is a spectacular thing for, combating terrorism or for law enforcement. I mean, obviously that would be lovely to know everybody's fingerprints in the world. But the question is, should you have to submit yourself to a Homeland Security database in order to exercise your right to vote? And I'm not so sure that that's constitutional.
Yeah. Well, they're getting people already ready for that with airports. If you go get pre-scanned, you can go right through. So people are doing it.
Oh, yeah. They're doing it. The United States, we're more skeptical about this whole thing of, submitting ourselves to do that to vote. But we're volunteering for it in many different ways. As you mentioned with airports, but also, we're rushing off to buy these new Apple iPhones, and the Apple iPhone has this nifty thing where you don't have to use a password, you just use your fingerprint.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other laptops and a lot of other mobile phone groups are starting to do that as well. Well, one of the groups called the Electronic Privacy Information Center has been trying through Freedom of Information to get the contracts to show how Homeland Security, what contracts they have with these private companies. In other words, are these mobile phone and computer companies turning those fingerprints over to national security? And the Homeland Security and the United States Department of Justice have simply refused to answer the Freedom of Information requests from Epic, and are now being sued because they're just trying to find out what's being done with this information. That's all.
You know what? Gosh, it just seems like they're getting us coming and going.
Well, yeah. And some of it you just feel like, wow, has this train just left the station? But at least we deserve to have awareness, and at least there should be full disclosure. I mean, if they're going to do it, we should at least be able to know.
Just to take it a step higher, do you think this actually ends up to be like a world government type scenario?
Well, it's probably not as simple as that, but and there's many different levels in terms of elections. There's many different levels of adjusting results, but I do think that there is a national security component to some of the new voting systems. Mm-hmm. There's actually no question about it in my mind. There's the current Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, actually was the CEO of the largest voting machine company in America. And another voting machine company called Vote Here had Robert Gates, who was the Secretary of Defense before Chuck Hagel, on its board. So it's interesting because a voting machine company is not that large. I mean, it's not really that big a market. They sell something once and then they can't sell anything for another 10 years. It's not that big, not that profitable. And that's pretty much all these companies do. They're not diversified companies. So it's pretty amazing that you would have two executives in a row who end up being the National Secretary of Defense. I just find that I don't know what to make of it.
Is it kind of like a money laundering type scheme or something like that going on?
I don't think so. I think if you look back in history, starting certainly during the late 70s and early 80s, the U.S. started to figure out that in terms of foreign countries, it was a lot less bloody if you could simply adjust the election rather than try to stage a coup.
Sure.
And they actually had, in the congressional record, you can actually find budget expenditures. It was the second biggest budget expenditure of the CIA, influencing foreign elections. Well, we're in a dangerous world nowadays, and it seems logical that a plan B, if the really wrong guy they feel is getting in, that as a plan B, some of the international security forces would want to be able to edit that result. And the problem is that's on the one hand, we all want to be safe, but
Sure.
on the other hand, what a slippery slope, because at what point do you, pretty much everything changes there. And if you look at what elections really do in the U.S., they control so much of our everyday life in so many ways that are really good for us to be able to voice our opinion. What roads are built, what's done with schools, what's done with debt, what's done with development, what's done with law enforcement, the budgets, all of these things are things that directly affect our lives and we should have a say in. And so it's not about the President of the United States necessarily. It's about everything, all these little elections.
Well, now elections, they really virtually control the money and the power.
Yes, right. Really there's three things that sort of jockey for position for power, and that is money, politics, and crime. Mm-hmm. And, they are always, depending on what location you're in, one gets the upper hand or another, or there's a constant tension between those and competition. And so politics, of course, is where elections come in, and grassroots and public say and all that fits into the politics part of that equation. And so we have to look at, if we really do want our say to count, if we want there to be a say, we have to be able to see what's going on with the money. Mm-hmm. We have to be able to verify and authenticate so that we can keep corruption and crime out of the process. It's not really that complicated.
Sure.
It's just hard to get people to see sometimes because they get so bamboozled by all these details.
Yeah. One of the things that's really happening here in Wyoming right now is State Superintendent Cindy Hill. She got voted in by the people, but she voted against Common Core and other things like that. And so now the legislature, beginning of the year, voted and they took her power away, and they put a czar above her, and the governor signed it. Well, now she's still fighting it. But, I just
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very, very interesting.
Well,
I hadn't heard about that. I'm going to have to go back and look that one up. That's very interesting.
Well, I'll tell you what. I got some shows that they have done, and they actually had her on. I'll send them to you via email. You can kind of listen to them, too.
Yeah, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I will. What's amazing to me is, even one of the county commissioners was before the legislature saying, you guys can't do this. This is unconstitutional.
Right.
And so, she was bringing up back in the 1900s and I think 1800s, this was tried before, but they had to reinstate her because they didn't do it constitutionally.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, that reminds me of a similar situation. There was an election official in Emery County, Utah named Bruce Funk, wonderful guy, and he was told by the state that he had to accept new touchscreen voting machines. And when he received them, he noticed that they had discrepancies in memory and some other things, battery life. So he called our organization, Black Box Voting, in to take a look at the machines. And we found what the New York Times referred to as the nuclear bomb of security flaws. Mm-hmm. Voting machines were pulled off the shelf in about 5 states, and an immediate correction was implemented. But what happened to the election official who simply wanted to see what was wrong with his voting machines was Diebold, the company that made the machines, flew in a corporate jet, flew down to Emery County with the lieutenant governor, and took him out of office. Huh. Now, he was an elected official, and he could not get anybody in the legislature or, anybody to really stand up to this. But clearly, you had a private company coming in and deposing an elected official.
I seen a mayor today in Annapolis where he got voted in. He's a Republican, and now city council wants to pull all of his power. I'm seeing more and more. I'm hearing stuff like that more and more.
That's very, very interesting, and let me tell you why. If you look internationally at what's going on, there's a really excellent resource called Freedom House, and they have a report every year called Freedom in the World. It's this book that costs about $50, but I actually find it quite worth it. And one of the things they do is they come up with they have a list of parameters on whether you're free or not free. And in the elections area, one of the parameters that surprised me, because I hadn't heard of this until, they said it and you said it, was if a person is elected, do they actually get to take power? And do they get to keep power? And apparently in foreign countries who are not particularly free, they may have elections and then they just don't let the person take power. And that's not a new thing. And it's actually one of the things that they rate in order to determine the level of freedom in a country. So it is very interesting that we're starting to see that kind of an erosion of our freedom happen here.
Well, and I think a good case of that is, but he got reinstated, was that sheriff down in Liberty County down in Florida where he was actually backing up the Second Amendment right to carry a gun. The state said no, and they actually arrested the sheriff. Of course, when they went to court, the jury awarded him back to have the power back to, as sheriff. With these things happening, I don't know how to put it, except how can people support their local officials when they get bamboozled by this?
Well, I think one of the things, clearly it works to fight back, and I think we have to remember that freedom has never been easy for anyone in any country. Maybe it was easy for us for 50 years or so. I don't know, but it's never been something where you can just sit back in your armchair and go, oh, they got it for me. People have to realize that if we want to be free, we actually have to take action, whatever makes sense to us. It's remarkable how much one person can achieve. Absolutely amazing how much just something that one person decides to go out and fight for actually wins. And it isn't going to be like we wave a magic wand and all freedom, all challenges to freedom are fixed. You know? If that was the case, we could just pass a law against crime and we wouldn't need police anymore.
Well, that's true. I think one of the most interesting things that's happening is just south of us is in Colorado with the 51st state initiative. What are your thoughts on that?
The secession one, yeah. I actually have pulled all those articles, and it's one of the things I've sort of sidelined to really get my head around and read. I have to confess, I'm not really familiar with the issues as much as I should be, other than to note it with interest and grab all the articles and say, I need to learn about this.
Yeah. Well, I guess, basically what the people down there are just tired of all the taxes on what they're, with them. They want more freedom. They don't want all the cities telling them how to do things. So,
well, and the municipalities themselves are becoming a bit of a problem, and that's because there is a group called the National League of Municipalities, I think it's called. It's actually international. And I've been watching what they've been doing country by country, and they're actually a very corporate kind of takeover group where they are re-engineering the laws in a lot of municipalities so that the public doesn't really have as much of a say anymore. They create these cookie cutter legislations that get passed in city after city, and it's very concerning, to say the least. So I think when you start seeing citizens rise up and say, let's have a secession effort or whatever, we should look at that as a hopeful thing. Not that we want to have an unstable government. We do want stability, but we also do have to have some autonomy and exercise. There's nothing wrong with exercising our autonomy.
Yeah. Do you know a lady named Dr. Catherine Albrecht? She's been kind of dealing with stuff, in a different venue, but she's been getting out there kind of like what you're doing. Somebody had just sent me her contact information, and it's one of the things I have on my list because I do think it would be worth making contact. And I know she's working a lot on the privacy issue, I think. Yeah, she is.
But, there's a lot of amazing people out there who, and by the way, it's not like most folks have some special part of their DNA. I think we don't have enough confidence in ourselves individually. We can do a lot, Even, this David and Goliath thing, Davids can win.
Oh, that's very, very true. Very true. I knew somebody that was, he had done a talk on, standing against tyranny. And, just by standing up would give the enemy the quiver, of shaking like, I can't believe there's actually somebody standing up against me.
Exactly. Oh, exactly. That's, it shocked me when I went after the Diebold Corporation, which is now out of the elections business, by the way. But when I went after them for some of their problems, how powerful they thought I was. It was really funny. They thought I had hundreds of thousands of dollars behind me, and I was so poor. I didn't have anything. I had truth. That was worth a good bit, and they would quake in their boots sometimes. I would come in and you would just see their faces drop, and they were all these powerful corporate lawyers, and I thought, gosh,
yeah,
this is really amazing. But the thing is, there is not an expectation that people will stand up for things, and that is a great power that we haven't unleashed.
Well, I know out here in Laramie County, we have some great people that have been elected that are actually standing up. I mean, like with Cindy Hill, I don't think they realize that, that she would have done what she's done. I mean, she's taken to the Supreme Court and now she's suing. I mean, my gosh, I think she's gone beyond and saying, I'm not going to do it like the good old boys.
Right. And, that is, the good old boys is really the word I usually use because, you know who is the accepted power structure and who is the upstart. Mm-hmm. But time after time, and this is why we know we do still have some freedom here, we do see the upstarts and the not good old boys prevail. It's a fight, but then I guess we should sort of expect that. As I say, it's never been easy, and as you look back through history, every fight, was at least at one point a fight, and people had to figure it out and be clever. But one thing that is underestimated is the cleverness of the average American person.
Yeah. Oh, look at the inventions. I mean, my gosh, the stuff that they've come out with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're very resourceful. We have tremendous ability to figure stuff out. And so we just have to get past this idea that someone's going to do it for us or someone's going to tell us what to think.
And that's true because a lot of people I know are in apathy.
Yeah, and that happens. It's a feeling. I would equate it on an individual level to a depression or something. It feels powerless, But if you go out and literally do anything, you might feel like the thing you didn't succeed, but you'll understand so much more about how the world works, and then you'll understand exactly what your next step should be. Another thing about organizing, there's down in Pima, Arizona, which is Tucson, which has a really good way of looking at this. He said, I would rather have 10 groups of 10 people than one group of 100 people. And the reason is, in any group, there's only one or two people that ever really get anything done.
Yeah.
So
sure.
You have 10 groups of 10 people. At least you got 10 or 20 people who are actually doing something.
Very true. Yes. What would you say is the worst and best places in the United States that are the best to vote?
There are municipalities in New Hampshire that are fantastic, and in all of New England. Maine, I think if I had to pick a state, probably Maine, even though they completely actually rigged the presidential caucuses back in 2012. Uh-huh. They got caught doing that. But the general elections in Maine are probably, for the most part, the most authenticatable by the general public. And some of them in Vermont and New Hampshire, depends which, those places don't run it by the county, they run it by the city. And so each one has maybe 200, 300 cities in it, but that whole New England area has, between the different ones, there's probably 1,000 different locations in New England that are excellent.
Yeah.
So, in terms of a region of the country that still has a lot of citizen control, I'd pick that. In terms of some of the worst places to vote, Colorado is getting to be one of the worst. Really, really just ridiculous. it's almost just a coup. The way I look at it, it's complicated. I don't want to go into it all, but they've basically started just mandating that they send ballots to every single person, whether they asked for it or not, whether they're dead or alive, whether they're active or inactive, and they're taking away people's ability to vote at the polling place and taking away accountability and refusing to let people look at the ballots.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of people that are speaking about moving to Wyoming because of the taxes and how they're, like they have me get voted in there, and you're not doing this thing that you said you would do. So
because they're not beholden to that's the thing that people that are putting these opaque voting systems in, I don't think they're seeing this. It's like it doesn't take very long before people realize that you are not having to be responsive to the people because you can get yourself in there whether the people voted for you or not. And once you stop being responsive to the people, the whole thing starts to fall apart.
I'd almost think that California would be one of the worst, but it's interesting that that Colorado's becoming like that. Do you have a clue or idea why that might be like that?
Yeah, Colorado they have a county clerks association that's headed by a woman named Donetta Davidson, and she was originally the Secretary of State of Colorado. Then she went up to the federal level and was part of the Election Assistance Commission. She is bad news. I mean, she is just all about taking away people's right to authenticate anything. And she is a very powerful entity who she's banded together all the election officials behind her. Not all of them. Colorado Springs has been resisting her all the way. But she has just pushed things through the legislature. So I think sometimes it has to do with you get the wrong person in there and they can do a lot of damage very quickly.
Yeah, I know they've had some recall on people down there in Pueblo and Colorado Springs where they were actually voting against gun, they were putting in some gun legislation that would ban people's rights and that. So 2 people got out.
Well, that's true. They succeeded in those recalls.
Yeah.
But, they had to litigate because what they first were trying to do is send all kinds of ballots out that really were not legal in any way, shape, or form. And the folks who were going for the recall actually had to litigate for their right to have a legal election, which they managed to prevail. Had they not done that, they probably would have lost.
This is a question that you might hear people ask, but do you think that it comes to a point where people don't feel like they're being listened to, that it comes to a point where they have like a civil disobedience?
Well, civil disobedience, we did that just back in the 60s, as many of us recall. Yeah. I'm old enough to remember that, although I was a little too young to be involved in it. But we actually have a duty to resist laws that are unconstitutional laws.
Well, that's very true.
And some of what's being done now is actually invalid law. So we have a duty to resist, and there's various ways to resist. Through litigation is one way, and a lot of people have been prevailing, but it's very expensive to do that. Through organizing is another way. And through civil disobedience is another. Civil disobedience, I'm wondering if it's as effective as it once was, though, because I think maybe the forces that learned how to deal with it a little better than they did back then. But we have a duty to resist. If it's an invalid law, if it's at its core, if it's unconstitutional, we have a duty to resist.
Most definitely. I want to make sure that people know that how you're funded so they can help you.
Yeah, we are. We don't take big, huge, fat cat donations or grants. We're entirely funded by small and modest citizen donations. I think our average donation size is about $59, and people donate anything from $10 to $100. And sometimes we have a few people with a little more, but we're broad-based and diversified with small amounts rather than having a few people who end up being able to control us. And that keeps us honest. So people can donate to Black Box Voting by going to blackboxvoting.org, and there's many places to see where you just click a button and there you go.
Can you tell people about your book just a little bit so they can get buy your book?
Oh, it's for free now on our website. In the right-hand column, we have put all the chapters up for free. I will be doing an updated version in the next 6 to 12 months, and that'll be on Amazon.com. But right now, I just put that up for free, and it's interesting because even though I did write that book back in 2004, actually 2003, it is pretty much still valid. The only thing that's not is that some of the companies have been acquired by other companies or whatever. But for the most part, everything in it is still valid, and they really haven't solved most of the problems that were brought out in that book.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the 2014 elections? What are you looking at? What are you seeing?
I think that we're going to see just huge increases in this vote by mail, which is so dangerous. It's such a playground for fraud, I can't tell you. I have no idea which direction things are going to flow politically, because, of course, that does go back and forth. But I do want to say people still should vote, and here's why. If an election is going to be tampered with, it's actually possible to overrun that tampering with lots and lots of votes that prevail one way. And that's because if you're going to manipulate an election, you need a couple things. You need plausibility. And if everybody supports one candidate and you just go, I'm going to have the other guy win by 96%, you lack plausibility, and it's going to get investigated every which way, and people will be all over it. So usually the way that elections are manipulated is by shaving the vote. You either a percentage of people extra are dumped in or are suppressed. A percentage of votes are flipped or added or subtracted, but not all of them. Because if you do all of them, it's too dangerous. It can create an implausible result too easily.
Yeah.
So it's important to get out there and vote.
Bev, I really appreciate you coming on. Anything else that you can mention about your website or things that people can be looking at?
Well, I stay tuned, because toward the end of this month we're unveiling an entire new blackboxvoting.org that will look very different, but it'll have everything. It'll just be a lot more cool, with lots more visuals and video and multimedia, because we do know that we need the younger generation. I'm not the younger generation. I'm 60. So we need the younger generation because this is it's an ongoing battle, really, to keep control of our government, and they respond much better to multimedia and social media. So we're going to be heading that direction, so folks can send links to their kids. That will be good. And certainly, just I can't stress enough that it's an each one teach one, each one get involved type of situation. We do not organize groups of people and have them all march in a line behind us. I don't believe in that at all. I don't even think a democracy would work if you do that. We believe in local folks figuring out their local situation and using their common sense and cleverness and going after it. And when people do that, then we are happy to, consult, mentor, whatever.